Welcome back. I'm Shane, this is Relative Time, and today we're going to take a look at the strangest Phoibos yet, which is something I think I've said a few times over the last couple of years, but this polarizer really takes it to another level. Now, if you're still watching, this is the Phoibos Vortex, and the best way to describe this one with its completely rounded case is that it's kind of a compressor version of a Seiko tuna, or maybe it's just a steampunk Arnie. Whatever it is, it's a bit of an oddball when it comes to the design, but it's also a bit of a spec monster at the same time, and we'll talk about that shortly. But before we get to all of that, as usual with Phoibos, I do need to point out that this watch was provided by them, and they are asking for it back, hence the promotional tag at the beginning. That said, let's start talking specs, and this is where this watch really shines. And after that, we'll move on to the not so shiny parts. In terms of size, you're looking at a 43.5mm wide case without, and 46.5mm with these oversized crowns. Which sounds large, and it kinda is. But note that with this case design, there aren't any lugs, or at least not any traditional lugs integrated in this hockey puck case. In fact, turning the watch over, you can see that the straps go into a large cutout, which goes almost all the way to the screwed down case back, pushing the spring bars in a bit and creating a fairly short effective lug-to-lug of about 37mm. Also, despite its chunky appearance, the total thickness here isn't too bad at 13mm, at least not for a watch with 200 meters of water resistance, and an extra anti-magnetic shielding that protects the Swiss-made Selita SW200 up to 20,000 ampere per meter. The Vortex watch head itself also feels pretty solid and well built in the hand. In fact, in terms of build quality, this may be the second best Phoibos I've run across. And overall, it's sitting with a weight of around 135 grams on its rubber or leather straps. Note, there is no bracelet option with this one. On my 7¼ inch wrist, it still feels pretty wide. Yet it does wear smaller than you would expect for its size. And because of the design, there's zero overhang here. And I think that's going to be true even with slimmer wrists. However, this hockey puck-like case is built like a hockey puck, so it's pretty dense and solid. So unless you really cinch that strap down, it can feel a little top-heavy and flop around as you walk around. Rounding out the specs, you have a 22mm lug width and a flat sapphire with a healthy 6 layers of anti-reflective coating. And if there's one thing I can compliment the Vortex on, it's its visual clarity and contrast of the various elements. Everything here comes through beautifully. Especially with this colorful multi-tiered dial, where the base of it has this gray textured layer, and then on top of that a metallic sandblasted light blue ring is placed, which is grooved throughout and has the indices sitting on top of it, giving the watch a ton of depth that you can actually see through with the skeletonized Omega-like hands. From a build perspective, Phoibos went the extra mile here to ensure that their unique design is a quality built watch. And when it comes to Lume, that's another area Phoibos didn't skimp on, using 15 layers of grade A super luminova, making a compressor style diver with excellent lume. Although, thanks to the smaller surface area on the hands, we're not quite talking king of lume level here. But it's still excellent, and probably the second best Phoibi I've seen for lume, and that's after the Great Wall. When it comes to the design aesthetic, the Vortex is a bit odd, there's no denying that. And in some ways, the Vortex turns the traditional dial watch formula on its head, as rather than putting the chaptering on the very outer edge of the dial right next to the Arabics on the internal bezel, here Phoibos brought it into the middle, sitting on the slanted edge of the dial's raised metallic layer. And I think that alone is really going to throw some people. They're going to look at it and just feel uncomfortable. When it comes to microbrands, there's a fine line between originality and strange. And the Vortex may have gone a little too far on that side, especially since it makes the second hand look really short, even though it's actually the perfect length for the chapter ring. Now, I'm not going to judge the aesthetics here too harshly. As they say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and there are plenty of oddball designs I've seen that I like. And I'm sure there are some out there that are looking at this and absolutely love it, while everyone else has probably stopped watching at this point. But while I won't judge it based purely on those aesthetics, I will judge it based on the functionality of the design, and whether or not it really succeeds for the type of watch they're going for, in this case a tool watch. And this, I think, is where that design really starts to fall apart, and it falls apart for one specific reason. Don't get me wrong here, I fully appreciate the uniqueness of the design. Tunas and Arnies really aren't my thing, but I do love that they're delving into new territory here. And they're doing it with a pretty interesting twist, creating a watch with a great presence and a ton of depth. Plus, just from all these macro shots, I can tell that Phoibos went the extra mile when designing and building it. So there's still a lot to appreciate here. Yet with my particular OCD, there's one thing that I would consider a critical failure. And that's that it's hard to read or set the watch accurately. Which on a dress watch is perfectly fine. But when you're talking a tool watchy diver, that is a problem. If you look at the minute hand, you'll notice that the back half of it completely blocks the chapter ring. So that when you're reading it, or more importantly trying to set it when it's in between the indices, you're gonna have to guess at what it's over. For some, this may not be a problem, but for my particular OCD, I find it very frustrating. Especially when there's some minor tweaks they could do to alleviate this issue, like making the bezel more detailed, or just putting a small cutout in the back of that minute hand. I mean, it's already skeletonized, so why not? And that way you could see the chapter ring even though it's past it. But like I said, this would be perfectly fine on a clean, classic-looking dress watch, but not so much on a diver. Another thing that's bugged me when wearing this is the crown for the movement. Believe it or not, I'm actually down with the over-the-top size and oddball design of the crowns, as I think they kind of make this into a really cool steampunk Arnie. And the crown for the internal bezel is really easy to get a hold of and use. It's bidirectional and freely rotating, as most compressor-style divers are. But the crown for the movement is a whole other story. If you take a closer look at it, you'll notice that it's pretty smooth, at least compared to the other crown, as there's no knurling here. And that difference is something I've definitely noticed when trying to use it. It's a lot harder to get a grip on and turn. Although, once again, they could alleviate this with a minor tweak. As you'll notice, there's a little bit of a round cutout, so they could just place a black rubber band on it, kind of like what Orient did with the Tritons, which should give it some added grip as well as keep that same style. Also, another thing to note here is that you may be stuck with the two straps that come with the watch. If you're a regular viewer, you know I like to try different straps on the watches when I do these reviews, and I actually had 3 lined up to try on the Vortex, but none of those 3 would fit into it. If you check out the case spec, you'll see there's not a lot of room between the spring bars and the case. In fact, the watch already uses bent spring bars paired with curved end straps just to make it work as it is. Eventually, you may be able to find some aftermarket straps that fit, but for the most part, just plan on using the 2 it comes with, which luckily, they're both quite good. So for me, there are definitely some issues here, but they're actually quite easy to fix if they ever do a version 2. But at this price, I kind of wish they would have gotten some feedback from the general public beforehand. And then we would have had version 2 right here. As for the movement itself, this is one of the few Phoibi out there to use a Swiss Selita SW200. Most of the time, Phoibos stays in the shallower end of the pool, with Seiko NH35s and Miyota 9015s. So it's kind of interesting to see Phoibos experiment with a higher price tier here. Although, one thing you should note here is that when they list the movement in the specs, they list it coming with, and I quote, accuracy regulation, which makes it seem like they've gone above and beyond in terms of regulating it. But digging further into this, and by digging I mean just scrolling down and reading more of the description, they actually list the accuracy as being plus or minus 12 seconds a day. And that's about what I found with this one. But the thing is, I'm pretty sure that's just standard spec for Selita, so I'm not really sure why they're making it seem like they're doing more. Maybe they're just referring to their standard Seikos, or maybe it's just something lost in translation. Either way, let's just move on to value. And because of that Selita, because of the build quality and the increased magnetic resistance, Phoibos is putting this one at a higher price point than most of their other offerings, with an MSRP of $599 US. But if you know anything about Phoibos, you know that there are always discount codes floating around. And in fact, right now, there's an early bird pricing discount of $149 off, which won't last long, but it's there right now. And that brings the price down to about $450 US, which spec-wise really isn't that bad. But I think the uniqueness of the design is the thing that's really going to hold this one back. And in that way, This one reminds me a lot of the Phoibos Great Wall, which is actually my favorite Phoibos. When the Great Wall came out years ago, it was one of Phoibos' first real attempts at making a truly original design. As before the Great Wall, Phoibos was primarily known for their great budget homages. Since it was so unique, Phoibos really wanted to make this watch special, so they built it up as much as they could, creating a 500-meter powerhouse with a ton of lume. And all of that was powered by a Swiss ETA 2824-2. It was only a few years ago, but that was back when you could actually get an ETA, which wound up making the Great Wall the best built and most expensive Phoibos around when it was released. And that price, combined with the oddity of its shield and spear designs, really kind of doomed this experiment to being somewhat of a failure, even though it was a great, if not weird, watch. Yet, interestingly enough, the Great Wall has become kind of a cult classic among Phoibos fans. In fact, in the last few months, I've seen numerous people trying to hunt one down on their Facebook group, most of which have been unsuccessful. Seems like the people that have them have no interest in selling them. So, what's my point here? Why am I going off on this tangent about the Great Wall? Well, simply put, it's because Phoibos, I think, is repeating history. And in a lot of ways, the Vortex is really the spiritual successor to the Great Wall. If nothing else, it's definitely the best built Phoibos I've seen since the Great Wall. And unfortunately, just like the Great Wall, I don't think this watch is going to be quite the success Phoibos wants it to be. When I do a review, I always look at the watch and I try to think about who this watch would be ideal for. And with the Vortex, I'm kind of drawing a blank here. Other than maybe just an extreme Phoibos fan who loves the strange and unusual. And if that's you, and you're okay with my issues that I listed above, go for it. But in general, a quirky design paired with a high price tag usually doesn't work out together. Which in a lot of ways is a shame, because as a Phoibos fan, I'd love to see them keep occasionally playing in this price range, rather than just sticking to the budget waters. The thing is, they just have to find the right design to go with it. One which straddles that fine line between originality and familiarity. Anyway, that's the Phoibos Vortex in a nutshell. As usual, let me know what you think about it down below. As well as what do you think about this Phoibos GMT coming out soon? Phoibos has decided to jump on the NH34 bandwagon, but with this one, they're going 39mm. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really does help the channel. I'm Shane, this is Relative Time, and I'll see you next time.